Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this first webinar, the regional webinar that's presenting basically the regional processes and researches results from a Central or Central Eastern European perspective. My name is Viktor Varjun, the director of the Institute for Regional Studies, which is a network research institute. And we have 5 territorial branches in Hungary. And actually, I'm happy to launch this webinar today. Actually, our aim is to organize at least 2 webinars every semester and present and discuss the most important regional issues from our perspective. Saying that sounds it's a little bit subjective, but what it means, our perspective, is the Central or the Central Eastern European perspective. Actually, the regular structure of the webinar would be that firstly, we would share a presentation about an actual topic we think that is important for a wider audience, and this would be actually presenting by a colleague or a scholar who is working with us in a close cooperation. Then 1 or 2 discussants from inside from our institute or preferably outside of the institute are asked to reflect on the presentation, and then the audience has the opportunity as well to share their thoughts. So actually, the recent webinar doesn't follow this structure. This is rather an interactive discussion in order to show the different approaches we have, but the aim is to follow the before mentioned structure. I hope that the Central or Central Eastern European insights can extend the collective knowledge of regional science and regional studies and help to understand our world a bit more from giving a special perspective to the discussion in regional studies and regional science. And now I would like to give the floor to the moderator of this first event, which is Peter Balog, assistant professor at the university and also research fellow of our institute. So Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victor. Welcome to all participants also from my side, wherever you may be. My name is Peter Balog, and I'm a research fellow at the Institute for Regional Studies. I will be moderating this event and would like to encourage you to put your questions or comments in the chat or by turning on your camera or at least your voice here. Now, understandably, many events these days focus on the tragic events in Ukraine and the role of Russia as well as other greater powers in them. While we are of course not neglecting the big picture here, we would like to contribute to such debates by discussing some effects of the ongoing war on regions located in the more or less immediate borderlands of Russia and Ukraine. More specifically, we will be paying special attention to the Finnish-Russian borderland and some regions of southeastern Europe. The idea is that we have 2 blocks, first focused on the macro-regional level and then the latter one more on the local level. With me today is James Wesley Scott, who, if he needs to be introduced at all, is Professor of Border and Regional Studies at the Karelian Institute at the University of Eastern Finland. James is a long-time specialist, and his work is widely known in border studies and beyond. Also with me today are 2 excellent experts on Southeastern Europe, Peter Reményi, also a research fellow at the Institute for Regional Studies, and Zoltán Palmer, as well, research fellow at the Institute for Regional Studies. So to begin with a more broad question, perhaps targeting James especially. James, how would you say that the recent and current situation is affecting Europe, in particular notions such as borderless Europe and so on, more generally?
Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. I hope everybody can hear me. Is that the case? and very glad to be here at this actually first webinar that the FFI is organizing, and very actually difficult questions that we are addressing here that defy any kind of simple or quick answer. Before I say anything, one thing that might be important to mention is that we, all of us, Peter, you, and then Peter Reményi and Pamazoli, we are all in one way or another border scholars looking at borders in a different way. So one of our concerns really is how do we actually think about borders, study borders, given the present context of geopolitical conflict. And so I just wanted to start out with a kind of couple of general observations, thinking in terms of how do we actually deal with this as researchers. And I think one of the main things that we see, and it's not something that has just erupted with the February 24 invasion of Ukraine, but it's something that has been gradually in the making, is the what I would call the geopoliticization of regional cooperation in Europe, and how and remarkable observation of how things have shifted. The conversation really has shifted in the last 20 years from a situation where the dynamic of European integration and enlargement is creating kind of I wouldn't call it a hegemonic, but a rather, let's say, cohesive narrative of regional cooperation based on this idea of economic benefit, of environmental interdependence, and the need for developing more effective networks between cities and regions within an expanding European Union, but also, and we saw this with the neighborhood, the ENP, the European Union's neighborhood program, also extending the ability to have access to the EU's opportunity structures to neighboring states. Ukraine, Russia, of course, at the beginning, Russia, Ukraine, the so-called Eastern Partnership. And a very strong narrative of cooperation and debordering, you could say, and I mean, not getting rid of borders in any legal or physical sense, but debordering mobility and getting rid of the divisive or the barrier function of borders. And in gradually speaking, we see that geopolitical contestations and competition, primarily between East and West Russia, primarily between the European Union and the Russian Federation, have eroded this this narrative to the extent where that we now find, and maybe we're also talking about the result of a natural process, that instead of, let's say, one coherent narrative of regional cooperation dominating geopolitical thinking, we can see a kind of a fragmentation or a multiplicity. Actually, maybe that's the better word, rather than fragmentation, of multiplicity of different geopolitical projects taking place at the more local, more meso regional level. For example, in Southeast, in the Balkans, Southeast Europe, in between Poland and its neighbors, between Finland and what used to be the cooperation between Finland and Russia, which is now not very much dominated by the war scenario. There's a real shift in thinking about cooperation that is now dominated by interest politics, by geopolitical strategies, and unfortunately by conflict, in the very concrete case of the Ukraine. And I think one of the things we want to do is discuss what kind of consequences this is having for thinking about borders. I think border studies are not going away anytime soon. And I think because of the present situation, the importance of border studies is being, in fact, emphasized rather than diminished. We really need more research along these lines. But this is the main point that I'm trying to make, is that we see a shift towards much more sub-regional, regional geopolitics within the EU context and in the neighborhood context, and nobody really knows where these where the meeting of these different geopolitical projects is going to take us. Whether it be in the Balkans, whether it be in the neighborhood with Ukraine, what does the neighborhood with Russia hold in store? This is now completely open to discussion and speculation. We have no idea. And yes, and those are just basically a couple of opening observations that I wanted to address. I could also talk about what's going on. Maybe that's later in the agenda. What's going on the Finnish-Russian border itself? Should I do that later, Peter, or should I?
Yeah, please, James. We will do that in the second part. But I would like you to just briefly reflect upon, before we move on to the others and some local context, is maybe to say something more general about Finnish-Russian relations in recent times, just so that people get the context for which.
Generally, the Finnish-Russian cooperation that was quite, in fact, vigorous until up to 2014, the Crimea annexation, and then the policies, what do you call them again? The sanctions against Russia, which made then cooperation a bit more difficult, was actually was very successful, I would say. And it was a story that was built up in the 1990s and in the early 2000s about a northern dimension to the European Union and its neighborhood, and a new way of conceptualizing post-Soviet cooperation across borders. And it was quite successful, economically speaking. It was a great benefit to northern Finland. It was a great benefit to Russian partners, a great benefit to Russian academics who were involved in learning networks, academic networks with Finnish universities, also here in Joensuu. And for this, we came to accept this kind of a new status quo, this regional cooperation focused in the north, and trying to depoliticize, geopoliticize, things that could be energy, cooperation in natural resources, in forestry, etc. And now this, of course, this narrative has come to an abrupt end. And we can only talk about this in the past tense. This is history. The question is, what we don't know now is where will we going tomorrow in terms of the neighborhood with Russia? Thank you.
Thank you, James. That's great. And we will be elaborating on the immediate borderlands, the very local level, in a later block. But now let's move over towards south, and with that, I would like to ask Peter Remény to give his insights into this nexus between Serbia and Bosnia and Hungary on this national geopolitical level in recent times.
Thank you very much, Peter. I would like to also welcome everyone listening and watching us. First, I would like to share with you a few points to continue the logic of James about geopoliticization of cross-border relations and multiplication of geopolitical projects, as he labeled them. So actually, in this part of Europe, in the Southeast Europe or Balkans, or more closely, maybe the Western Balkans, this kind of geopoliticization of relations, whether cross-border relations mainly, has been going on for a while, actually. So it's not a product of the Ukrainian crisis. Just to name a few points here without really elaborating them, like it started, let's say, we focus only on the 20th century, late 20th century or early 21st century, started with the dissolution of Yugoslavia, emerging new states, borders more than doubling in length. it is something which just increases the importance of geopolitical thinking in the local level, regional level. The Dayton Agreement in itself can be seen, at least, that something very geopolitical in terms. It's applying ethno-territorial logic in an everyday working of a country, which is again with all its implications towards territory, borders, boundaries in this part. The Kosovo independence in itself a huge issue, and we always think about the relationship between Kosovo and Serbia and its implication of borders, new international borders, internal borders, ethnic borders between Serbs and Albanians in Kosovo. But it also has consequences towards the so-called Albanian borders, the border with Albania and Kosovo changing totally its physical and mental representation in the minds of the local population. And where we are talking about, majority of us are speaking from Hungary, so it's like the Hungarian border fence can also be put in this row as a later issue on this geopoliticization of cross-border issues. But it is definitely true, and I agree with that, that this war in Ukraine just strengthened the geopoliticization of cross-border relations and this multiplication of geopolitical projects, especially in the region. It gave a new impetus, it gave a new force, a thrust, which just moved these projects farther. But I would say that maybe the start of it isn't this February, but rather 2014. The crisis starting with Crimea and well, actually the war between Ukraine and Russia. And again, I would like to give a few points here. Just think about the Kosovo precedent versus non-precedent. Actually, practically, for me at least, it doesn't even matter whether Kosovo could be a legal or political precedent for Crimea in 2014. Well, I think it's not the point. The point is that in narratives in Russia and in the Western Balkans, in Serbia, in Kosovo, they are linked together, and they are always applied. That Kosovo is Serbia, Crimea is Russia, whatever. So in the narratives, in mainstream narratives, in fringe media, in mural paintings, whatever, wherever, these are linked together, and it might not be illegal according to international law, might not be a precedent, but it is used as a precedent by different narratives. And also, well, back then in 2014, it was something like, if Kosovo has the right to secede, then Crimea also. But now it is reversed. And the narrative in Serbia, for example, goes like that Serbia should follow the Russian path and take back Kosovo, which was unjustly taken away by the West, just the way like Kosovo has been taken away from Serbia by the West. So it's this kind of precedent using, well, applied one way or the other. But also we can think about the infamous non-paper of 2021 about redrawing boundaries in, or well, something intention of redrawing boundaries in Western Balkans. I'm pretty sure that that without the 2014 Ukrainian crisis, this kind of reterritorialization attempts well, cannot be surfaced. Also, there is this fear of violent border changes in general, has a strong impact in Southeast Europe. For example, Milorad Dodik, a strongman of the Bosnian Serbs, is a lone exception among the European leaders who announced, as far as I know today, that he's going to recognize the results of the fake referendums in Ukraine. And as far as I know, he is the only political leaders in Europe to do so. And he is a politician with a clear territorial aim in his political visions, and with strong links to Russia and, well, growing links to Hungary, to be honest. So it clearly has, I mean, the Ukrainian, how the conflict will pan out will have a strong impact in the Western Balkans. And also today I've read that there are some growing warnings from the EU to Serbia to align with Western sanctions against Russia. So where would it lead us from here? I don't know. Well, no one knows. There is a scenario where Russia is going to withdraw from the region and Serbia will choose the EU path, European path, and slowly push Russian interests out of the country. But it can be the other way around as well. And well, Russia strengthening its positions in Serbia. But what is, regardless of the outcome, is, I think, will happen in Serbia is it might be that's the beginning of the end of Serbia's seesaw politics between EU and Russia. So they have to take sides, and that's going to be a great change in the region, since Serbia is a core country regarding geopolitics of the Western Balkans. So if Serbia changes so well fundamentally, and it's going to change, I mean, it's geopolitical path, then it's going to have an implication for all neighboring countries, including Bosnia, including Croatia, in Montenegro, the Kosovo relations, and even with Hungary. So that is true that Ukraine is having repercussions in the Western Balkans for sure. I mean, the crisis in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine will have repercussions. And just a few words on Hungary in this region. So this kind of well, fragmentation of the political geographical landscape and this multiplication of geopolitical agendas and projects is creating a room of maneuver for small countries, actually small states like Hungary. And in the last decade, let's say from 2014, 2012, 2014, Hungary has an increasing influence and increasing presence in the region in geopolitical terms as well. Hungary has not been a great military power for centuries, but is very active in Kosovo and in Bosnia and Herzegovina in peacekeeping forces and in other military related operations and cooperations. Also, Hungary is not known for its huge economic impact in the world economy, but Hungary is increasing significantly its economic footprint in the region. And now, regarding international trade in the Western Balkans, Hungary is comparable to countries of size like Turkey or France, for example, which is, of course, Hungary's overall size in global trade is very much smaller than of Turkey's or France's. But in the region, Hungary is becoming slowly a key player. And that's a very, very deliberate attempt, as far as I understand it, by the Hungarian government and the Hungarian economic actors, companies, and other institutions. So it's how to say, it's making efforts to increase its influence in the region.
Thank you, Peter. Before we move to Zoltan, just one specific question in connection to what you said. Of course, we know that these Russian-Serbian ties are very historically deeply rooted and long-standing. But of course, just a few days ago, we saw that Serbia too was rather frustrated about these referenda in eastern Ukraine. So would you say, is it too early to say whether Serbian-Russian relations will be impacted in a longer term because of that?
Well, no, it's not too early. It's going to be impacted, I'm sure. But we don't know in what extent. As for now, I see this as part of this seesaw politics of Serbia. Not accepting the results of the referendum is one move towards one step towards EU. Not joining or aligning with the EU sanctions, Western sanctions against Russia is a step towards Russia. And there are this one step left, one step right. But the warnings from the side of the EU are growing in number and in well, let's say in meaning as well against, I mean, towards Serbia to align with the EU or Western policies. So sooner or later, well, actually, that's my private opinion. I thought it's going to come sooner. That Serbia has to stand in a row and close ranks with other European countries, because well, to be honest, Serbia, from economic terms, economy-wise, Serbia has no other choice but the EU or Europe. Let's say, if you don't want to say European Union, but Europe. And if Europe and Russia are in conflict, then the economic interest of Serbia links the country to Europe. Well, I thought it's going to come earlier, but in a recent days, I see this kind of comments and news arriving from the European centers to Serbia that they have to change their position. So, well, not accepting the results might be connected to this. But on the other hand, as I told you, Dodik, that the leaders of Serbs in Bosnia, so the Bosnian Serbian president, announced that he is accepting the results. So there is this kind of difference between Serbian leaders in the neighborhood.
Thank you, Peter, for those enlightening insights. Zoltan, your research has focused more on cross-border cooperation in Croatia and Slovenia, two countries that are a little bit more distant from Russia and Ukraine in several ways, perhaps. But nevertheless, would you say that Croatia, Slovenia, and maybe Hungary also in some way are also affected by the current situation?
Yes, thank you, Peter. And I would like to also greet the audience. Actually, the short answer is yes, very much. But we must make something clear already in the beginning, and it is in line with that what Peter was saying, that this war in Ukraine and relationship of Russia and the EU and Europe in general is interpreted in the context, in those post-Yugoslavian countries, in the context of relationship between the particular country and Serbia. So this is something that we need to know, and this is also not only true for Bosnia or Montenegro or Kosovo in particular, but also to those countries which are already integrated into the EU, namely Slovenia and Croatia. And if we take a look at these two countries, the one which had always a better relationship with Serbia and Russia as well is Slovenia out of the two. Maybe because they are physically more far from Serbia, maybe they had a less minority of Serb minority before. But always the Slovenian-Serbian relationships were relatively good, and also the Russian-Slovenian relationship was relatively good prior to this war. And there were a lot of gestures made between these countries before. Also, we must admit that Slovenia is much more relying on Russian energy fuel than Croatia, for example. It's very important that if you want to look for the potential allies of the current Russian policy in these countries, we need to look at, unlike the rest of Europe, on the political left. So they are not those right-wing radical people who are closer to the Russian narrative, but rather the political left. But we can't say that this is a substantial share of the political palette in these two countries. In the beginning of June, there was an official letter issued by two former Slovenian presidents from the left, Kučan and Türk, who warned the that-time right-wing Slovenian government led by Janez Janša, who was actually Orban's ally, in the European People's Party, to warn him about about his very severe orientation towards Ukraine in this conflict, because Janša was one of those few politicians who in the very beginning visited Zelensky in Kiev. And these former left-wing high-level officials said that Slovenia must be more cautious in this issue. But otherwise, since then, Janša is gone, and there is a new Slovenian government, which is a left, politically defined as a left-wing government, but actually nothing has changed. So Slovenia has taken the side of Ukraine in this crisis, and it is clear. Practically, there's no political party in Slovenia which is promoting the Russian narrative. Croatia is a very interesting issue, because in Croatia, everything in the context of this war is understood as relationship with Serbia. So if you check the news and if you read the commentaries, every third question about this story is that what will be next? The next step will be in Kosovo, the next step will be in Bosnia or on the border of Croatia. So the whole interpretation of the war is very much about this, the role of Serbia in the region. And we can't find a really serious party in Croatia which would promote the Russian narrative on this conflict. The only one who is very often mentioned actually in the press and in the media is the current state president Zoran Milanovic, who used to be a prime minister from the left party, actually, and he is now trying to expand his room of maneuver in local politics, with sometimes advocating not pro-Western, standpoints in this conflict. But in general, we can say that in Croatia there's no serious party or no serious politician in Croatia apart from the president's unreliable statements who would support the Russian narrative. It's very important, the role of the Prime Minister Andrej Plenković. When he was a member of the European Parliament, he was the head of the Commission of the European Parliament dealing with Ukraine. And it's also very important to know that Croatia has an expertise about the so-called peaceful reintegration of territories that was done in eastern part of Croatia, in the area of Erdut and Vukovar. After the reclaiming of these territories in the 1990s, they established their legal system, and they try to export this to Ukraine. There's a high-level committee between the two countries which is dealing with this political and administrative questions. And very important effect of this relationship is to some certain EU policies, but particularly to the Schengen policy, because it is very important that Croatia has been proclaimed as a Schengen-compatible country already last year, and it was promised that by the European Commission, and it was promised that the Schengen accession will take place very soon. And this is also not an issue for Croatia, but also an issue for Romania, because Romania is already in the waiting room for years, and they are very much upset for this treatment. And hopefully this accession may come in the next few years. And actually there were two countries which were opposing Croatia's accession to the Schengen Treaty. One of them was Slovenia, due to the unsolved disputes about the border. It was also expected when this left-wing government was coming that these disputes will be put onto the agenda again, because this was very much pushed before by the Cerar government and left government, but actually it didn't happen. So the current Slovenian government promotes the accession of Croatia into the Schengen zone, and does not have concerns about it. Similar situation is with Romania. It is very important that a lot of infrastructure constructed between Hungary and Romania, for example, roads which have not been opened due to the Schengen border, and they are still closed because there's no personnel for operating the border control mechanisms there. This can be also a plus between Hungary, Croatia, and Slovenia, Croatia, opening new border facilities, promoting the free movement of people, and so on in these border sections. Also very important that it was mentioned the defense, because there have been elements of fence built also between Hungary and Croatia, and also between Slovenia and Croatia as well. And it was promised that if Croatia will access the Schengen zone soon, Slovenia will remove these physical barriers from the border, which is very important because there's a very massive movement of people between the two sides of the border. Actually, Zagreb is not so far from the Slovenian border. Actually, the whole area, there's an agglomeration of Zagreb in the west of Croatia, which is more or less on the border with Slovenia, like Zaprešić, Samobor, and other major suburban towns, which are having very strong connections, and people are moving from one side to another on a daily basis. So this is something which can have an impact. On one hand, there's a conflict which divides countries, which divides the political sphere, but on the other hand, there's a need for unification, there's a need for consolidation of the European policies, and that one of those impacts can be the extension of the Schengen, and we will see it very soon, how it will happen.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your input in the first block, which has shown that the current situation has indeed been reshuffling politics and potentially even some long-standing geopolitical alliances in the region. So in the next block, we would like to pay more attention to how local level cross-border cooperation and also local communities in the immediate borderlands are impacted by the tragic war against Ukraine and the current circumstances. So first we would like to come back to James and ask him how local Finnish-Russian cross-border projects have perhaps been halting or mobility, how is mobility affected, and how are local attitudes and communities impacted in recent times.
It's primarily about mobility because cooperation is basically on ice on any for all intents and purposes. What the big drama now is about the Finnish government partially closing the border to Russians trying to come into the country. This is something that hotly debated in the Finnish parliament. But now the decision was made, and in fact, today, midnight or 1 a.m. this morning, whatever, the regulations were made much more strict. So Russians with tourist visas are not allowed to enter the country, even if they have a Schengen visa. They are allowed to enter for humanitarian reasons, if they have family, for reasons of study, or if they actually work and can prove that they work in Finland, then they can cross the border. But for most Russians, this is basically a very tough restriction. If you're just coming with a tourist visa, you cannot enter the country. And at the same time, the Finnish border guards have revealed that there is a fence going to be built along the Russian-Finnish border. So this is something that a couple of years ago was really very far away from the political discussion. It was, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do here this, copy the examples of other European countries in putting up a fence. But now with the invasion of Ukraine, even if it's just a show of that we are doing something about it, they have decided, in fact, to put up a border fence. As far as I know, the first idea is to extend it on the very southern part of the Finnish-Russian border, southeastern part where the peninsula is. But it could be that they will have the border fences close to all of the border crossing points across through it's like a 1,400-kilometer long border. So this is a big thing. And so cross-border traffic to places like Lappeenranta, which was still possible, is going to be stopped. That, of course, is a very tough blow for local economies that were living on that were getting economic benefit from Russian tourists and Russian shoppers. That kind of short-term mobility is now curtailed. What will happen is that Russians seeking asylum, then obviously the number of asylum seekers will of course increase. If they try to apply for asylum, they can in fact get access to Finland, and the numbers here are expected to rise. So this is something that it's a very new situation, and it happened rather rapidly. The political parties, there's no, let's say, there is no political party here in the country that is, you could ever say, has been pro-Russian in any kind of let's say active political sense of the word. But I mean, the Social Democrats much more cautious, much more thinking of not trying to disturb the balance too much. Whereas, of course, the more nationalistic, the more conservative parties really wanted more forceful answer to Russia's aggression. And I guess the political pressure was such that they decided, okay, there's nothing we can do about it. We have to restrict border access, even though it's the reasoning behind it is not clear, because they say it's for security reasons, not because we want to punish Russians who want to have coming here as tourists. We're punishing them because their country's invading Ukraine. It's for supposedly for security reasons, but as everybody knows, if you have saboteurs, if you have people working with the atmosphere, they're already in the country. They're not going to come overnight with these people. So it's very much a political show of political will, a show of geopolitical will. We are part of NATO. We are part of Europe. We are doing something about the Russian threat. We are closing the border and we are putting up the fence. So that's basically a border politics, kind of a classic border politics maneuver, which is responding to this situation. Cooperation, in that sense, unfortunately, is dead, and we don't know when it will be revived anytime soon.
Just a short follow-up on that. Have you come across any reports, James, about local attitudes in the borderlands being articulated that are somewhat different from the public attitudes more generally in the country or among the political elites?
What I'm gathering is that people are at the borderland are actually sorry that Russian tourists can't cross. There's no real Russophobic wave of emotion that we can tell. And so people on the borderland are actually not too happy with this, as far as if my reading is correct, what I've heard. And it's more a national decision that, we have to do something to protect our borders. And because they were not perceived, that the Russian tourists coming over were not perceived as being a threat. On the contrary, they're bringing something to the local economies. Its threat is Putin and the FSB and his army, not everyday Russians have come across the border.
Thank you, James. Peter, I would like to ask you, of course, but the Balkans do not share any physical border with either Russia or Ukraine, but nevertheless, Serbia is of course special in that it's one of the few countries where Russian citizens can still transit or arrive. And so that's one thing I'm curious about. And the other is how you would assess any impacts on local cross-border cooperation in the region more generally in the current situation.
Okay, thank you. Yep, that's right. If you can remember, at the first months of the intensification of wars, I mean, in February, March, April, there were these news about Air Serbia flying twice, 3 times, 4 times to Russia, and well, transporting a lot of people from Russia to Serbia, and these sanctions of air traffic started to hit Russia. So there is this kind. Well, the number of flights decreased since then, but there is still a link between Serbia and Russia. Furthermore, as far as I know, Russians don't need a visa in Serbia, but Zori can correct me if I'm wrong. But I think there is no visa requirement. And there is an increase of number of Russian citizens arriving to Serbia, and it is impacted it impacts also the for example, the real estate market in cities such as Belgrade or Novi Sad. But not only Russians, but also Ukrainians move to Serbia, would like to save their lives, avoid being conscripted or whatever. And also that affects economy. Companies are relocated to Serbia from Russia to trying to tackle or dodge or whatever EU sanctions, because then they are not working, not operating in Russia, but in Serbia. And for that there is this let's say perceived historical relationships of Russians and Serbs, the orthodoxy and the pro-Russian stance or pro-Russian attitude of the general Serbian citizen, which is in Serbia it is not let's say fabricated or manipulated or increased by the political elite or parts of the political elite or political parties. This is a real existing attitude of Serbs towards Russians. So well, that's wouldn't say a safe haven, but something, a place where Russians can move and save their property or wealth or lives. Well, on the real cross-border micro level connections, as you mentioned, the country or the wider region of the Western Balkans doesn't share a border with Russia or Ukraine. So what I see right now as a direct impact of these relations is maybe the strengthening of the border regimes, the border control, and I expect the border policies to be hardened, to be more strict. Maybe introduction of border control where there haven't been so. Or increasing its strictness and things like that. So that's what I see now. It's against maybe against smuggling, maybe weapon arms traffic and things like that, but also against people.
It's interesting you mentioned that both Russians and Ukrainians are arriving in Serbia. In some European countries, it was reported that there are some tensions between them, and some groups are lobbying that the one or the other group should not be allowed to let in. Have you come across anything like that from Serbian news?
Yeah, I've only read that they are living relatively in well, let's say without conflict with each other. So it's not an issue right now in Serbia.
Yeah, and regarding the potentially strengthened border controls, one could imagine that perhaps Croatia or some other country would be fearful of, I don't know, many Russians arriving to Serbia who then potentially make it somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Thank you, Peter. So, last but not least, Zoltan, would you say that local cross-border cooperation or border control has been impacted by the current situation? Croatia?
I think not that much, because Croatia and Slovenia is located much more far away than the other countries. Of course, particularly in Croatia, there were news about arriving refugees from Ukraine, dominantly women and children, and a lot of news have been published about it, how well they have been integrated, attending schools and so on. So actually, there's a very positive attitude of the Croatian society towards the Ukrainian people coming from the Ukraine. Much more interesting is maybe how, if we look at the EU-funded cross-border cooperation, how is it going on currently? If you go back to the currently still ongoing program, which is a 2014-20 program, when it was elaborated in 13-14, the program of Ukraine, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, this is a quadrilateral program, which is still ongoing. The programming of that program was during the Euromaidan in 2013, and this shows how much the European politics were skeptical about Ukraine that time, because the whole programming process and the acceptance of the program was a very long process. And it seemed to be in the beginning that the whole program will maybe fail. But in the end, the program was put together, projects have been selected, projects are ongoing, but now the war events have affected this program very much. And some projects have had to be redesigned without the actual Ukrainian partner to be finished properly. So the war just made these projects to be accomplished properly impossible. Another interesting issue are the programs between Poland, Ukraine and Belarus, which is still an ongoing program. This is a huge program, actually, 170 million euros. It's one of the biggest such cross-border cooperation programs, which is also financing major transport infrastructure projects as well. This new program has been already designed for the 21-27 period, but without Belarus. So it means that the whole program area, which is also including those regions of Poland which are bordering only with Belarus, will be eligible to cooperate with the Ukraine. So the whole previous program area minus the Belarus regions. Also, the program, the continuation of this quadrilateral program of Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, Ukraine is very well going. Actually, despite the war events, even if the past projects are not going on, the programming of the new program is going up very well, and it has already been sent to the European Commission. So it looks like how the European politics have changed in the past 7 years. In the beginning, there was a reluctancy towards Ukraine. Now it's a clear support towards Ukraine. If we just look at the cooperation between Hungary, Slovenia, Hungary, Croatia, we can see also some kind of tendencies. Cooperation between Slovenia and Hungary is much smoother, has always been much smoother, actually. And new programming is going on very well, and hopefully the projects will be soon starting also from the new program. But the situation is very different with Croatia. We can see that there is some kind of tensions between the two governments, tensions about the issues related to the INA, related to MOL, related to some political influence, related to the will of the current Croatian government to save the image of Croatia as the most reliable EU partner in Southeast Europe. This is very important. And it is sometimes leading to conflicts to its neighbors, for example, with Hungary. So that's why the cross-border cooperation between Hungary and Croatia is not going on very well. There's a huge delay in the process, and there is a chance for losing some kind of funding if the agreement won't be made before the end of the year, just like similar situation as with the mainstream funding between the European Commission and the government of Hungary. So we can see some effects already of this conflict, but this is not on the everyday level of the people and of the potential institutions who are doing the operational cooperation. We will see how the things will develop, how the things will evolve related to the Schengen expansion, and how the micro relations will change to the better or to the worse. Actually, I think that we will see some some impacts in the next few years, I'm sure about it.
Thank you, Zoltan. And it's great you told us that these programs with Ukraine, at least along the EU borders, are going on despite the difficult situation. So before we open up to questions and comments, I would just like to ask you whether you have any final thoughts or comments, perhaps any positive, optimistic prospect despite everything, or maybe some more general ideas about how border studies will be impacted if we need to formulate some completely new research questions or rethink some of our concepts or anything of that sort. Any final comments from your side related to what we've been discussing?
Very good question, Peter. And I think, well, as I said at the beginning, I think border studies itself is not in any danger of becoming less relevant or less interesting or less important in terms of trying to understand how the modern world is operating at different levels. But it will, in many cases, it's going to be tough to recalibrate people who have been working on specific borders, specific cases. And I'm thinking of the Finnish-Russian one. I mean, my colleagues, who've been working with Russian colleagues for ages, for many years, now don't know what's going to happen. They basically have no more access to the field. They have no access. They can't even cooperate with these people. Our university forbids them from interviewing Russians in Russia. You can have a Skype chat for every day. That's, of course, they're not going to intervene with that. But you cannot have a research-oriented kind of a relationship with someone in Russia. And how can you retool? How can you readjust your border studies agenda given that kind of situation? Are we, looking at the history of the cooperation? Are you going to be going online and trying to interpret the blogosphere? And if you can read Russian media, this is one option. It's very difficult. So in that sense, for specific cases, there's no question that it's a very painful kind of a situation. Another painful situation that could happen is because of these breaks in contact between Russia, primarily thinking of Russia, and European universities and academics, is that we will stop speaking a common language. We will really be hard to communicate about borders. That already was kind of a problem before, but as academics, we generally had a common understanding of what we meant when we talked about cross-border cooperation and borders, and that we had a kind of a critical approach to the state and its relationship with borders. And now, our colleagues in Russia are basically being forced to either shut up or tacitly support, Russian activities. So you can't talk about annexing borders. No, that's not. You talk about, let's say, liberating. You talk about integrating Ukraine. This is one aspect that is complicated. On the other hand, I think that border studies in general is going to have a wide field of study emerging out of this crisis as well. But perhaps at a more general level, how Europe is rebordering, for example, and it's actually not very happy work. Not very. It sounds actually, now that I speak about it, rather depressing. But let's put it this way: that our sense of Europe kind of moving in a general direction of debordering relationships and increasing those things that we actually need to deal with global problems like global climate change, etc. We are seeing less of that now. We're seeing more rebordering and more restrictions to cooperation, and even kind of an impasse in terms of the European Union's trying to push integration, at least at the moment, because of this crisis situation. And yeah, you know, dealing with that is not going to be easy. There's no real kind of, you know, future-oriented idea that we might be working towards. We're just kind of looking at how is our world fragmenting in front of our eyes. Let's hope that the future perspective will not be as negative. I'm actually not that pessimistic. If we survive this conflict, not that pessimistic, but in the short term, it's hard just to see where, you know, where we're going to how we're going to move forward in terms of a new research agenda in border studies.
Thank you, James. With that, I would like to open up for questions from the audience and participants. Please, if you have any question or comment, then yeah, just put them in the chat or raise your voice here on Zoom or other channels. If there are no questions just at this moment, I should not forget to mention that this was, of course, the first webinar in what will hopefully be a long series of webinars. These are webinars of the Institute of Regional Studies in Hungary, and subsequent upcoming events will be announced on social media, of course. We can see the link in the chat. So on Facebook, for instance, there is a specific site for the webinar. It's just called webinar, and on Twitter you can follow our events on the account of the Institute for Regional Studies, and the links are in the chat. And we are also on LinkedIn as an institute. So at least I cannot see any questions at the moment. So I'm turning to Christina, who has been assisting us today.
We answered everything. We answered all possible questions.
Exactly. So if there are no questions, I would like to thank all the participants for your very insightful comments. And of course, the discussion needs to be continued, and I'm sure it will be continued. And as we could see, border and regional studies have a lot to add to these questions. So thank you very much. And if there are no questions, then thanks from my side, and hope to see you later in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a good weekend.
And you.
Fight the crisis.